Welcome to the Log Church. Thank you for joining us today for our Devos. And this week we have been exploring the subject of asking ourselves the question, are we growing? Are we growing in our faith? Are we growing in our relationship to Jesus? Is it really making a difference in how we live? And a lot of us, we tend to become stagnant because we don't ask these types of questions. So today I'm going to give you one that's kind of a little bit, I don't know how to say it. This is a very direct question, and it's something that the older I get, I'm starting to become more understanding of how important it is, and that is this. Do I think about Jesus more? Like, do I think about Jesus more than I did years ago? Now, I don't know wherever you are, where you're listening to this, I don't know when it was that you discussed or decided to enter a relationship with Jesus, when God got a hold of your heart, whatever language you want to use, but I did not grow up as a Christian. I did not. I lived in a non-Christian home, and I had no exposure to the Christian faith. There were a couple people in high school that I had met that were believers, but it was very, very few and far between. So when I became a Christian, I wanted to learn everything, okay? So like I got a Bible, I started highlighting, I started reading, I did all these Bible studies, I did internet Bible studies, I got some of the church's messages. Back then they used to sell them on cassette tapes. Isn't that crazy, cassette tapes? I'm not that old, but that's what we used to do, okay? So I had the church's message collections on cassette tapes, and I would listen to them and take notes. I would go to the sermon a couple times, I just want to know about God, know about God, know about God. And then, I went to Bible school and the seminary, and I learned all the stuff, and I'm teaching and all this stuff. And as I started to get older, something happened. Okay, this is, and I don't know what you want to call it, but I started to feel like knowledge is not the key. It's really not. And I always thought it was. Like, one of my biggest fears as a pastor, I'll be honest, and it started when I first became a pastor, is I was always afraid, like, I'm going to say the wrong thing. Like, I'm going to say, like, okay, so, like, the God that we worship, and then I'm going to say some other weird name and not Jesus, okay? So, like, I'm always afraid that I would be looked at as, like, this guy doesn't know. Like, he doesn't know what he's doing. Like, he shouldn't be up there. And it was always a fear for years. But then I really started to look at what true maturity looks like. And I'm not even there. This is something that's probably 2 or 3 years that I've started to examine this. Spiritual maturity and your relationship to God, knowledge helps. And learning about the Bible, understanding the Bible. I mean, there's really few things that you can do for your soul than to learn about God through His Word. Okay, it's really, really helpful to do that. But at some point, you have to focus and go, okay, I honestly just want to live my life in the light of who Jesus is and what He's done for me and what He wants to do for those around me. It's super simple, but it's way more challenging. It's super simple, but it's way more challenging. Now, I'll give you an illustration about this, if you don't mind. And it's a little bit, not very complicated, but if you remember when Jesus was asked by the disciples, but I should say by the Pharisees, because they were trying to catch Him. They say to Him, what is the most important commandment? There's like 600 and some commandments. Give us like the number one. Like, tell us like the greatest hits of the commandments. And Jesus says, okay, it's simple. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And they're like, yep. And they're like, that's what we thought. And they were ready to move from that point. And He says, and the second is like unto itself, love your neighbor as yourself. So He says that those two are like this, they're like on the same plane. And He oversimplifies all of those commandments. It's actually it almost feels blasphemous. It would have felt blasphemous to them. But then He simplifies it again. He takes those two commandments, He squishes them together, because squishing commandments is a thing, apparently. We just invented that. And He goes and simplifies it again in John chapter 13. And He says that your new commandment is this: you love one another just as I have loved you. That's the commandment. That's literally what Jesus tells His followers to do. So when you hear that, that's like so simple. You're like, love people just like Jesus. Okay, that's real easy, but I want to learn. Give me all the deep stuff. Give me the deep stuff. It's simple, but it is difficult because it requires all of you. And what it also requires is you to experience who Jesus is on such a deep and intimate basis that it actually transforms how you interact with people. I mean, when's the last time you sat and meditated in your soul about what Jesus has done for you? About how Jesus died for you, about how Jesus knew your name and he died and he shed his blood and he rose from the grave. Like the mystery involving that, the beauty of that, it's unfathomable to us that God would love us this much. And it's important for us to recognize that this is experiencing Jesus. The Apostle Paul says in Philippians chapter 3, verse 10, this is his desire, that I may know him, he's talking about Jesus, and the power of his resurrection, and I may share in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death. Now, when he says that I may know him, he knows him. He's writing about him throughout his whole entire life. Like he wrote letters about Jesus, and he talks about Jesus. Like he's in jail while writing this because of Jesus. So it's not that he doesn't know him, like, oh, who's Jesus? No, he wants to experience him more. He wants to experience the depth of who he is and the power of his resurrection. And the only way we experience that is by drawing closer to him. So that comes in a desire to really want to know Jesus in a different way. So do you want to know him more? Do you want to get closer to him? If you are, if that's you, and if you really feel that in your soul, you're growing. And that's good. Keep it going then.